The Oz, of course, splashed with those very alarming mental health statistics yesterday. That's the driver behind Greg Hunt's buying into this at the state level, demanding an expedition or expediting of the lockdown measures being lifted. But it's interesting to see that the Oz are continuing today on this same theme. They've taken the matter further, and they've got both Minister Hunt and Josh Frydenberg, who, as you said, some of the forward estimates in his budget are contingent on the development of a vaccine. And I think there's now growing awareness that that simply is not sustainable. We are going to have to manage some kind of new normal with a level of commercial activity. So it looks like the Oz are going with that. They've carried the Frydenberg-Hunt clash as well. But I'd like to draw your attention also to, we better also go to the other enormous story. Yoni Bashan in the Australian is as good as saying that Gladys Berejiklian's days are now numbered. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how and when. What's your sense of that, Caleb? You've been a columnist at the Daily Telegraph on and off at times too, so you've got a sense of New South Wales politics. There seemed to be some head counting on day one and then a reprieve. What's your feeling? Can she ride this out?
She could, yes, but it will be a very bumpy and difficult ride if she is to do it. I think the problem for Gladys Berejiklian is she has a firm number of people in her camp that buy her argument that she was led astray or misled by a dodgy boyfriend. And I mean, I've got to be quite honest, as a fellow human being, it's hard not to believe that argument, because she's not the first woman or the first man to have been misled by a partner and then felt, for whatever reason, like they can't get out of that, or have stayed in that situation because the companionship is something that they value and something that they need. Humans do strange things in those kinds of situations. But politics famously has absolutely no regard for personality. At the end of the day, if you're in the New South Wales Liberal Party and you want to stand a chance of winning the next election, having any smell of corruption hanging over your government is not a good thing. And so that's the question for people in the New South Wales Liberal caucus. Do we depose Gladys Berejiklian because it possibly smells, or do we stand by her? And I suspect that at some point people will decide that they've got to get rid of her. But as Yoni points out, it's not going to be a quick process. She's standing by her point of view, and the party right now seems to be standing by her point of view. So it's not going to be a quick and easy thing. It's either going to be very dirty, or there's going to be enough pressure put on Gladys that she has to go, which will be very sad for a leader who has otherwise been exemplary, particularly through coronavirus. But
extraordinary.
It would seem that her demise is somewhat inevitable.
Yeah, look, I'm starting to come to the same conclusion somewhat reluctantly. And again, I think it's an artificial distinction being made here between the public and private domains. I heard Alan Jones and Richo earlier, both very, very upset about ICAC's role, and it has accounted for some very decent Liberal premiers, including its founder, Nick Greiner. But it is very hard to see, when you see the Oz talking about bags of cash, as did the Fin Review that we referred to earlier, the bags of cash conversation and that kind of the brutality with which Maguire's evidence is coming out, and there's more to come. It is very hard to see how she sustains this, in that whatever our human sympathies, and I endorse what you're saying, she's been an impeccable leader. There's a lot to like about her. She's humble, she's very relatable, but it does seem that this character was essentially a sitting member of Parliament and, for all intents and purposes, operating a business out of the precinct of the Parliament itself. And at some point, it's just not going to pass the pub test that she didn't know. So Maguire's got 2 more days of evidence to go at the very least, so it can only get worse, I would think.
Well, and that's the problem. I mean, I have to say, I agree that at the start of this ICAC investigation, I was kind of like, well, an MP brokered a deal with some developers, he got a kickback for that. Is that necessarily the worst form of corruption or the worst thing an MP could do? The evidence that's come out today, which is basically that he was running a shoddy immigration mob out of his own office, was taking money for that, was organising meetings with MPs, etc., etc. That's just straight up and down corruption. And it is a question for Gladys Berejiklian of whether or not she knew of that. And it doesn't. She can stand there until she's blue in the face and argue that she didn't know about it and she didn't endorse it, she didn't have any knowledge of it. But in politics, perception is reality. And if people think that you as Premier were having a relationship with a man who was doing that kind of thing, if they think that that implicates you in some way, however true or false that may be, if people think that's the case, well, that's what people will think is the case, and they will vote accordingly.